In a low brick factory room near Bremen's old tobacco warehouses, in the 1900s, you take your place as a Bremen tobacco stripper with damp leaves cooling your palms before the day has properly opened. There is no hurry here, only the slow rhythm of the work and the quiet breath of the room. We stand together near the long wooden table, where the morning light lies thinly on the boards and the bundles of tobacco wait in soft brown layers, smelling of earth, rain, rope, and the far warm fields where they first grew under a different sky. The city outside is awake in a modest way, not loudly, not all at once, but by wheels on wet stone, by gulls over the Weser, by a cartman calling to his horse through the river mist. Bremen, in the 1900s, is a port of warehouses and brick walls, of ships coming in with cargoes that carry other climates in their holds. And you, as a Bremen tobacco stripper, work at one of the quietest points in that long journey. The leaf has already crossed water. It has already been bought, weighed, sorted, moistened, carried, and stacked. Now it comes to your hands, and your hands begin the small patient task that gives the factory its steady pulse. You sit or stand, depending on the table and the forewoman's habit, with your apron tied at the waist and the first leaf laid out before you like a dark, veined map. It is wider than your hand, thin at the edges, thicker along the middle, and when you lift it, it bends with a soft, leathery sound. The main rib runs from stem to tip, pale and firm, and this is what you must remove. You take the lower end between finger and thumb, feeling for the place where the rib gives itself away, and then you draw the leaf gently apart, one side and then the other, so the usable lamina falls in supple pieces beside you. The work asks for care, though it does not announce itself as skilled in the way a carved cabinet or a polished brass fitting might do. It is skill of another kind, almost hidden inside repetition, and by now we can feel how the body begins to learn it before the mind has finished describing it. You do not tear too quickly, because a ragged piece is less useful. You do not grip too hard because damp tobacco bruises under pressure. You do not let the rib cling because the heavy stem burns differently and is not wanted in the fine cutting or rolling work that may come later. Around you the room gathers its morning sounds, and none of them is sharp enough to disturb the drowsy steadiness of the scene. Leaves whisper against wood. A knife taps once and is set aside. Someone coughs softly into a cloth, not with drama, just with the ordinary dryness of a room where plant dust floats in the mild grey light. A stove gives off a patient warmth, not enough to make the windows clear, only enough to take the edge from the damp northern air. You smell tobacco everywhere, sweet and bitter together, with a trace of molasses in some batches and a cellar-like coolness in others. The Bremen tobacco stripper is not alone in this work, though the labor itself often feels private, held close to the fingers. Other women and men may work along the tables, depending on the house, the season, and the kind of tobacco being prepared, and there is a quiet company in their nearness. You know the shape of a neighbor's hands. You know who works quickly, who keeps a clean pile, who hums only when the forewoman has crossed to the far end of the room. We move with them without needing to speak much, because the room has its own language of bundles, baskets, damp cloths, and finished piles. The leaves have often been conditioned before they reach you, which means they have been given enough moisture to soften without becoming slick or spoiled. In a dry state, tobacco would crack, flake, and turn brittle under your touch, but when it is properly brought back to pliancy, it folds with a quiet obedience. You can feel the difference at once. A good leaf opens like cloth that remembers rain. A poor one resists, curling at the edge or splitting where you do not want it to split, and then your hands slow down, because waste is watched even in a room where no one raises their voice. The light over Bremen is seldom extravagant in this season, and that suits the work. It comes through high windows in a softened sheet, touching the steam on the panes and the shoulders bent over the tables. You may hear the river traffic only faintly, a muffled horn or a call from the quay, but the port is present in every bale and bundle. Some leaves have come from the Americas. Some have passed through Dutch or German trading hands. Some carry names from places you may never see, and yet under your fingers those distant regions become small, immediate and real, reduced to texture, color, scent, and the clean pulling away of a rib. There is something grounding in work that begins the same way each day. The apron, the table, the bundle, the first damp leaf. We know where to put our hands, and that knowledge has a quiet mercy in it, because the world outside can be full of voices, prices, weather, and uncertainty, while the table asks only that this leaf be opened and separated cleanly. You breathe with the task, you bend a little closer. The morning stretches around you, not empty but full of small things that do not need to hurry. And as the morning settles fully over the Weser and the windows brightened by a shade, we move from the first touch of the leaf into the longer rhythm of the working day. By the time the Bremen tobacco stripper has finished the first bundle, the room has lost its early chill, and the smell of damp leaf has deepened into something warmer and more familiar. You have a little pile of stripped halves beside you, soft and uneven, and a second pile of ribs, paler, tougher, and slightly glossy where the fibers have pulled apart. The wood under your elbows is worn smooth by years of work. It has taken in oil from hands, stain from tobacco, and the faint shine of being touched again and again by people whose names may never have entered a ledger. The process is simple when spoken aloud, but it becomes more interesting the longer we stay with it. Each leaf must be inspected quickly, because not every part is equal. You turn it over and notice holes, patches, thick veins, torn corners, sand or mold that must be separated from the sound pieces. The best tobacco houses wanted consistency, and consistency did not appear by magic. It arrived through many small decisions made by people like you, in rooms where the air was heavy and the day was measured in baskets rather than clocks. You take a leaf from the damp cloth, lift it by the stem end, and let it hang for half a breath. The weight tells you something. A heavy leaf may still hold too much moisture, while a crisp edge warns you to be gentler. Your thumb finds the central rib, and your fingers follow the grain of the leaf like someone reading raised lettering in the dark. Then comes the movement, steady and familiar, as the rib is drawn away and the two sides fall apart with a soft, fibrous sigh. Some workers used a small stripping knife or a thumbnail to start the split, especially when the stem was stubborn or the leaf was thick near the base. Others relied mostly on the hands because the hands were faster once they understood the material. We can imagine your fingertips darkening as the morning goes on, stained by plant juices and dust, with the smell of tobacco clinging under the nails despite soap and scrubbing. The stain is part of the day. It belongs to the work in the same way flour belongs to the baker and coal dust to the stoker. The pace in a Bremen factory was shaped by both human patience and commercial demand. Tobacco had value, and value asked for speed, but speed had to be balanced against waste. If you tore too much good leaf away with the rib, someone would notice the poor yield. If you moved too slowly, the pile beside you would tell its own story. So you learn the middle way, the quiet pace that looks almost lazy to an outsider. Though inside it there is constant judgment, a weighing of texture, moisture, strength and use. Beside you, someone may have brought a piece of bread wrapped in cloth, dark rye with a smear of dripping or cheese, waiting for the pause that comes later. A tin mug may sit near the table, filled with coffee substitute, chicory or weak coffee kept warm as long as it can manage. These details matter because they make the room human. We are not watching a machine disguised as a person. We are beside a worker with tired feet, a dry throat, a private worry, perhaps a song half remembered, and a small hope that the weather will hold until the walk home. The sounds of Bremen arrive in layers through the factory walls. A church bell marks the hour with a round, distant tone. Wagon wheels pass over cobbles, dull at first and then brighter near an open yard. Somewhere below or beyond the room, men move bales with hooks and shoulders, and the hemp rope gives a rough creak under strain. You hear none of it as separate events after a while. It becomes the bed of sound beneath the leaf, the quiet accompaniment to the steady work of pulling, sorting, laying aside, and reaching again. There is a small dignity in knowing the difference between one batch and another. A new worker sees only brown leaves, some lighter, some darker, all of them smelling strongly enough to blur together. But after months or years, you notice more. You notice a silky wrapper leaf that must be treated carefully. You notice a coarse filler leaf that can tolerate a firmer pull. You notice when a bundle was unevenly moistened, when a stem is likely to resist, when a leaf has traveled too long or been stored too warm. The work teaches you through touch and touch remembers. In the 1900s, Bremen's tobacco trade belonged to a larger world of shipping, customs, warehouse labor, cigar making, and small factories where handwork still mattered deeply. Machines existed, and more would come, but the hands were not yet easily replaced in every part of the process. Tobacco stripping required attention to the living irregularity of leaves, and leaves do not behave like bolts or bricks. They wrinkle, stretch, tear, cling, and soften in their own ways. You meet each one briefly, and then it passes into the next stage, carrying the mark of your care. By mid-morning, the forewoman or overseer may walk between the tables, not loudly, but with the watchful habit of someone responsible for output and order. She may lift a handful from your finished pile, shake it lightly, and let it fall back to see how cleanly the ribs have been removed. You keep your eyes on the leaf in your hand. There is no need to make a show of working. The proof is already there in the baskets, in the neatness of the waste pile, in the evenness of the stripped tobacco waiting for cutting, rolling, or further sorting. We can rest for a moment in that plain arithmetic of labor, not the kind written grandly in books, but the kind counted in bundles and hours. One leaf becomes two halves, and one rib. A bundle becomes a pile becomes a basket becomes part of a day's work, and the day's work becomes wages, food, rent, coal, soap, thread, school money, or a small purchase held back for Saturday. Nothing is abstract when you trace it far enough through the hands. It all returns to the table. The Bremen tobacco stripper may not see the finished cigar, the packet, or the smoker who eventually handles the prepared tobacco. That is not unusual in industrial work. Many people touch a thing before it reaches its final form, and each person sees only one small passage of its life. Yet there is comfort in that small passage. You know this part. You know how the stem comes free. You know how the leaf should feel when it has been properly handled. And in a world that often asks people to rush past what is in front of them, there is peace in knowing one task well. And when the first pause of the day comes near, and hands begin to slow without quite stopping, the work shifts from pure motion into the gentler customs of rest, food, and shared quiet. The Bremen tobacco stripper's pause is not a holiday, only a brief loosening of the body inside the same tobacco-scented room. You straighten your back and feel the place between your shoulders answer with a dull warmth, because bending over a table teaches the muscles to speak softly, but often. Your fingers open and close once or twice, sticky at the tips, cool in the creases, and faintly rough where the ribs have pressed. We stand with you in that small release, while the room keeps breathing around us, and the unfinished bundles wait under their damp cloths. Someone unwraps bread. Someone pours from a tin bottle. A chair leg scrapes the floor and then settles. The smell of rye, onion, coffee, wool, and tobacco mingles in the air, forming a scent that belongs only to places where people eat near their work. You may sit near the window if there is space, watching condensation gather at the lower pane. Beyond it, Bremen's brick warehouses sit heavy and patient, their walls darkened by weather, their doors wide enough for cargo, their upper windows small and practical against the northern light. Conversation comes quietly because the day is not built for excitement. A woman may mention the price of potatoes. A man may complain gently about boots that let in water. Someone may speak of a child with a cough, or a cousin who has found work in a cigar room, or a ship expected in from overseas with another cargo of leaf. We hear these things not as drama, but as the ordinary fabric of working life, where news is folded into bread and swallowed between shifts of the hand. The food is simple, and that simplicity has its own texture. Dark bread can be dense enough to require patient chewing, with a sour smell that feels honest and familiar. A slice of sausage, if there is one, leaves a salt taste on the tongue. Coffee may be thin, bitter, and welcome. Your hands, even after wiping them, still carry tobacco's deep brown scent, so every bite seems touched by the room. It is not unpleasant after a while. It is just the flavor of the day, as present as the table or the apron. Rest does not fully separate you from the work, because the body keeps the rhythm even when the hands are still. You may find your thumb moving against your finger, repeating the first pinch of the stem without a leaf between them. You may look at the piles and measure what remains. We all know that feeling in our own ways, when a task continues inside us after we have paused, when the mind sorts, counts, smooths, or listens even in a moment of rest. The body is faithful like that. It keeps time. Bremen, in these years, is both old and busy, with guild memories behind it, and modern trade pressing steadily through its docks and streets. The tobacco stripper lives inside that change, though not always with the language to describe it. New machines, new rules, new prices, and new routes may all touch the work indirectly, but the leaf in the hand remains immediate. It is still damp, it still tears if rushed, it still asks for the same careful pressure. History can be large outside the window, while the table remains close enough to smell. There may be a wash basin somewhere nearby, though water does not remove everything. Tobacco clings. It gets into apron seams, hair, cuffs, and the small cracks of the skin. When you go home later, the room may follow you faintly, and someone in the stairwell may know what work you do before you say it. Many jobs announced themselves this way. The baker smelled of ovens. The laundress smelled of steam and soap. The Bremen tobacco stripper carried leaf, dust, moisture, and the warm, bitter sweetness of the factory into the ordinary spaces of evening. After the pause, returning to the table is easier and harder at once. Easier because the hands know where to go. Harder because the body has remembered that stillness exists. You retie the apron, pull the basket closer, and lift the damp cloth from the next bundle. The leaves beneath it are darker at the center, still holding moisture, and the first one comes away with a soft peel from the others. We begin again, not because beginning again is grand, but because most lives are made of such returns. There is comfort in the way the room resumes itself. The voices thin out. The chairs are tucked back, the piles grow. A late bell sounds somewhere across Bremen, softened by roofs and mist, and a draught slips under the door, with the smell of river stone. You take the next leaf, and the next and the next, each one similar enough to soothe the mind, each one different enough to keep the hands awake. That balance is the heart of the job. For a listener drifting near sleep, this is perhaps the place where the work becomes most peaceful, because nothing sudden is required, and nothing has to be solved. You do not need to know the whole future of the tobacco trade. You do not need to see the ship's manifest or the merchant's ledger. You need only feel the leaf, find the rib, draw it away, and place the pieces where they belong. The table gives you a world small enough to hold, and as the meal cloth is folded away and the afternoon light begins its slow slide across the factory floor, we follow the Bremen tobacco stripper deeper into the patient mechanics of sorting, grading, and keeping the day's work orderly. The Bremen tobacco stripper's afternoon begins with a different kind of attention, because by now the hands are warm, the room is warmer, and the piles have become large enough to require order. A careless table can confuse the work. Good leaf, torn leaf, ribs, damp scraps, and questionable pieces must not drift together. You keep them separate with small movements that hardly look like decisions from a distance. A half turn of the wrist, a push with the side of the hand, a glance into the basket. This is how order is made in quiet rooms. The color of the tobacco matters more than it first appears. Some leaves are honey brown, some chestnut, some nearly black at the fold, and some carry a greenish shadow that suggests curing was uneven or storage was not ideal. You learn to see these tones under the grey Bremen light. The best workers do not stare at each leaf for long. They take in color, thickness, smell, and feel almost together in one practical understanding. We can feel that knowledge moving through your hands as steadily as water through a pump. Sorting may happen before stripping, after stripping, or alongside it, depending on the factory's method and the intended product. In a cigar trade, wrapper, binder, and filler leaves had different uses, and the quality of the leaf shaped its path. A wrapper needed beauty and elasticity. A binder needed strength. A filler could be less perfect, but still valuable for flavor and body. Your task may not require the formal language of every grade, but your hands still meet those differences, and your hands respond with care. The stripped ribs collect in their own pile, pale and stiff like little fish bones of the plant. They are not the part most desired for fine use, but waste in factories was often watched closely, and different residues could be repurposed, sold cheaply, or disposed of according to custom and value. You do not romanticize the rib. You simply remove it. There is something restful in the plainness of that. The rib belongs there, the leaf belongs here, and the table becomes a map of separations. The room has its own weather by afternoon. Near the stove, the air grows heavy and damp. Near the windows, it stays cooler with a faint draft at the ankles. Your sleeves may be rolled, though the skin beneath them is marked by little flecks of tobacco dust. The wood smells warmer now. The cloths laid over the bundles have a sour dampness from repeated use. Somewhere, a broom moves across the floor, pushing scraps into a soft brown line that shifts and curls like dry seaweed. We notice, as the hours pass, how much of this job happens below the level of speech. A new worker might ask questions often, but an experienced Bremen tobacco stripper asks fewer, because the work answers through resistance and yield. If the leaf tears, you have pulled against the grain. If the rib comes away cleanly, you have found the right path. If the pile grows uneven, you adjust. The body learns through small corrections, and those corrections become habits so gradually that one day you discover you are skilled. There is also a kind of companionship in shared fatigue. You may not know every story of the person beside you, but you know the rhythm of their work and the moment when their shoulders begin to droop. You know the sigh that comes when a batch is too dry. You know the tiny laugh when someone finds an oddly shaped leaf, twisted like a hand or wide as a fan. The humor is mild, never bright enough to break the room's calm. It passes and settles, like dust in a strip of light. Outside, Bremen carries on with its own layered occupations. Clerks bend over ledgers, porters shoulder sacks. Ship chandlers count rope, lamp oil, canvas, and nails. Somewhere a printer inks type, and somewhere a brewer rinses a vat, and somewhere a woman shakes crumbs from a cloth into a narrow yard. The tobacco stripper is part of this web of useful motions, each trade repeating itself in a different smell, a different tool, a different posture. We do not need to rank them. We only need to notice how each one held a piece of the city together. The industrial process surrounding tobacco could be both simple and elaborate. Leaves were cured where they were grown, packed and shipped, inspected on arrival, stored carefully, moistened for handling, stripped of their stems, sorted again, and prepared for cutting or cigar making. At each stage, too much dryness could break value, too much damp could invite spoilage, and too little attention could blur quality into waste. Your place in that chain is narrow but necessary. Without stripping, the leaf cannot be used in the same refined way. Without careful stripping, the next worker inherits trouble. A forewoman may keep tally in a notebook, noting output by worker, batch, or table. The pencil moves quietly. The pages smell faintly of dust and thumbed paper. You may not see every mark, but you know that time and leaf become numbers somewhere in the room. This is one of the gentle tensions of handwork in industry. The body feels the slowness of each movement, while the business counts the total. Between those two measures, workers find their pace, yet there is no need to make the afternoon stern. The light softens. The hands continue. The piles rise and settle. You discover that a good batch can be almost pleasant, with leaves that part cleanly and lie flat after stripping. A difficult batch asks more patience, but patience has already been trained into the day. We stay beside you as the room grows quieter, not because no one is there, but because everyone has entered the same practical concentration. There are moments when your mind may wander while the hands continue, and this wandering is part of repetitive work. You might think of the market, of laundry, of a letter, of a song sung in the street, of a child's school slate, of a neighbor's new coat, or of nothing at all. The leaf still opens, the rib still comes away, the basket still waits. Work like this gives the mind a narrow lane to walk, and sometimes that lane is shaded enough to feel almost peaceful. The Bremen tobacco stripper is not outside history, but the history that reaches this room arrives softly through wages, prices, imports, regulations, and the slow change of tools. In the 1900s, Germany was full of factories, workshops, rail lines, ports, and households adjusting to modern rhythms. But at this table, the old and the new sit close together. A global commodity passes through human fingers. A factory uses hand skill. A port city depends on intimate touch. That mixture is what makes the scene so quietly interesting. And as the afternoon lengthens and the leaf dust settles into cuffs and apron folds, we move with the work toward the end of day tasks that make tomorrow possible. The later hours of a Bremen tobacco stripper's day have a softer edge, though the work itself does not vanish until the final basket is counted and covered. The room's brightness lowers by degrees, and the windows become pale rectangles holding the color of the sky. Your hands move more slowly now, or perhaps they only feel slower because the body has carried the day's repetition for so long. The central rib of each leaf still waits in its familiar place, and you still meet it with thumb, forefinger, patience, and practice. End of day work in a tobacco room is not only finishing what lies before you, it is also protecting what remains. Leaves cannot simply be abandoned in open air, especially after careful moistening, because they may dry at the edges or take on too much damp from a cold room. Bundles are covered, cloths are checked, baskets are moved away from drafts, scraps are gathered, tools are wiped. We can hear the shift in sound as the room changes from production to keeping, from the quick soft whisper of leaf to the slower scrape and lift of tidying. The stripped tobacco may be weighed or carried onward, depending on the arrangement of the workplace. A basket that seemed light when empty now has substance, not heavy like coal or flour, but full enough to press against the arms and leave a broad, dull ache. The leaf inside has a springy looseness, and when it is moved, it releases a warm gust of scent, deeper than at morning, because many leaves together make their own little climate. You carry it carefully. No one wants clean work spilled across the floor. Ribs and waste are handled separately, and their dryness makes a different sound. They rattle faintly where the leaf halves only whisper. A broom gathers the small fragments that have fallen under the table, and the bristles push over boards darkened by years of the same brown dust. You may find pieces stuck to your apron, curled against the cloth like autumn leaves after rain. The comparison is simple, but it comes naturally, because tobacco in these rooms often seems halfway between field and factory, still carrying the memory of soil even after crossing oceans and warehouses. By this hour, the body has a catalogue of sensations, the neck is tight, the fingertips are tender, the feet know the boards, the throat holds a faint dryness from dust and warm air. The hair may smell of leaf. The cuffs are marked, yet there is also the quiet satisfaction that comes when a table is cleared, when a bundle has been finished, when the day's work can be seen in real piles rather than imagined effort. We do not need to exaggerate it. It is enough that something disorderly became orderly through attention. The wages of such work were not grand, and the position of many tobacco workers, especially women in preparation rooms, was often modest. Still, the skill was real, and the endurance was real, and the contribution was part of Bremen's working life. We can hold both truths gently. A job may be poorly paid and still require knowledge. A worker may be one among many and still have a particular way of doing the task. The world often forgets the hands that prepared its ordinary goods. But tonight, we have not forgotten yours. The forewoman may make the last round, checking coverings, baskets, and benches. Her shoes sound firmer now in the thinning room. Someone laughs quietly near the door, already half in the evening. Someone else searches for a scarf or a buttoned coat. The stove settles into itself with a little tick of metal. Outside, Bremen is cooling again, and the damp from the river comes back into the streets, as if it has been waiting all day behind the walls. Before leaving, you clean your hands as well as you can. The basin water clouds quickly, taking on a tea-colored tint, and the soap makes only a modest lather against the stubborn resinous smell. You rub the fingers, the nails, the lines of the palm, and still tobacco remains, faint but certain. We might think of it as the roux signature, pressed into the skin. It will fade by degrees, but not all at once. Some work follows a person home in the simplest, most physical way. Your coat has been hanging near the wall, away from the dampest corner if you were lucky. When you put it on, the fabric feels cool at first, then begins to hold your warmth. The apron is folded or hung. The table stands bare except for a stain, a stray fleck, a tool, or the outline where the bundles lay. A room after work often feels larger than it did during work, because the bodies have begun to leave and the objects remain. The tables do not speak, but they seem to remember. As you step out, Bremen's evening offers another set of textures. The cobbles shine where mist has settled. The river air smells of water, tar, smoke, and old brick. A horse exhales near a cart, and the breath shows briefly before disappearing. Windows glow in upper rooms. Somewhere, supper is being made, and the smell of cabbage or onions slips out when a door opens. Your hands are tired, but empty now, and that emptiness is one of the evening's small gifts. The workday does not end because the tobacco's journey has ended. It continues elsewhere, through cutting rooms, cigar benches, packing tables, shops and counters. But your part, for today, has been completed. You have met the leaf where it needed a human hand. You have separated rib from blade, sorted usefulness from waste, and added your patient labor to a chain much longer than any one worker could see. That is enough for one day. And as the factory door closes behind us, and the tobacco room rests in its own brown-scented stillness, we can follow the memory of the work back through the city, toward the ships, warehouses, and quiet history that brought each leaf to that table. The story of a Bremen tobacco stripper begins before the table, before the apron, and even before the brick factory room warms under its morning stove. It begins with leaves grown far away, under suns stronger than Bremen's pale northern light, in fields where tobacco plants stood broad and green before cutting, curing, packing, and shipment. We do not need to leave the quiet mood to understand this. We only let the mind travel slowly backward, as a hand might trace a thread through cloth, from the finished pile to the bundle, from the bundle to the bale, from the bale to the ship. Bremen's position on the Weser made it a city of arrivals. Goods came in with the tide of trade, and tobacco was one of those goods that carried distance inside its smell. When bales were opened in warehouse rooms, they released more than a commodity. They released heat remembered from curing barns, the sharpness of fermentation, the dull sweetness of pressed leaf, and the dust of rope, wood, and travel. You, as the Bremen tobacco stripper, encounter the softened, prepared version of that long passage, but the journey is still there in the folds. A bale of tobacco was not a romantic object to the people who moved it. It was weight, paperwork, value, risk, and labor. Men hauled it, merchants priced it, inspectors judged it, warehouse keepers stored it, and factory workers eventually prepared it for use. Each stage involved routine. Each routine had its own smell and posture. We can imagine a warehouseman's shoulder under a sack, a clerk's finger following a line in a ledger, a sorter's eye measuring color in dim light, and then your hands at the table, opening the leaf's central rib. The tobacco room depends on moisture in a way that feels almost domestic. Too dry, and the leaf breaks like old paper. Too wet, and it grows heavy, dark, and troublesome. So workers use damp cloths, controlled storage, careful timing, and practical judgment to bring the leaf into a state where it could be handled. You learn this state by touch. It is not dripping. It is not crisp. It is pliant, cool, and faintly alive under the fingertips, as though the plant still remembers flexibility. This is one of the quiet sciences of old work. Though no one in the room may call it science, the leaf contains fibers, oils, and structures that respond to air and water. The rib is stronger because it once carried nourishment through the growing plant. The thinner parts tear more easily because they are made for spread and surface, not support. When you strip tobacco, you are following the old design of the plant, taking apart the architecture that once helped it stand in a field. We can say this simply and then return to the feel of it in the hand. The Bremen tobacco stripper may never have seen the field where a particular leaf began. That distance is part of port work. People in port cities often live among objects from places they do not know, and over time those objects become familiar in practical rather than dreamy ways. Coffee sacks, cotton bales, hides, grain, spices, timber, and tobacco all arrive with names from elsewhere, but the worker knows them by touch, smell, splinter, dust, and weight. The far away becomes ordinary, and the ordinary becomes a living connection to the wider world. There is a gentle humility in that. You need not possess the whole root to belong to it. You only need to do your part well. The leaf was planted by one set of hands, cured by another, packed by another, shipped by another, and brought into Bremen by still others. Your hands remove the rib. Later, hands will cut, blend, roll, wrap, pack, label, sell, or carry. A single object passes through so many lives that no one owns its full story, though each person leaves a small invisible mark upon it. The factory room is therefore not separate from the harbour. It is an inland echo of the ships, only quieter, warmer, and more enclosed. The same trade that creaks in ropes outside becomes the whisper of leaf inside. The same weather that dampens the quay changes the way bundles must be handled near the window. The same city that sends merchants into counting rooms sends you to the table with an apron and a practiced thumb. We can feel the whole system breathing slowly through this one modest job. And when we have traced the leaf back as far as the room allows, we return again to the worker's hands. Because the history of trade becomes most peaceful tonight when it rests in the small repeated gesture of stripping. The Bremen tobacco stripper's hands are the real tools of the job, more important than the knife, the basket, the tally, or even the table. They learn without ceremony. At first, they may be clumsy, tearing leaves at the wrong angle or leaving too much rib behind. Then, slowly, the fingers begin to understand pressure. The thumb knows when to press and when to release. The nails learn where to start the split. The wrist learns how far to pull before the leaf resists. Hands in such work become both sensitive and tough. The skin may roughen from fibers and washing, yet the fingertips remain alert to moisture, thickness, and weakness. You might feel a hidden flaw before you see it. You might know from the first inch of movement whether a leaf will part cleanly or require coaxing. This kind of knowledge is difficult to put into written instructions because it lives in timing. It is the kind of skill older workers pass by demonstration with a few plain words and many hours beside the table. A new worker in Bremen might be told to watch the rib, keep the halves clean, waste little, and never let the bundles dry out. These instructions are useful, but they are only the doorway. The real learning comes through repetition so steady that the mind stops resisting it. Leaf after leaf, hour after hour, the same problem returns in slightly different form. You solve it with less thought each time until the solving becomes almost part of your breathing. We can feel how sleep itself might understand such rhythm. The posture of the work matters too. If you sit, the back bends forward, and the table's edge presses into the same place again and again. If you stand, the feet bear the day, and one hip may take more weight than the other. The shoulders learn to stay low, because raised shoulders waste strength. The elbows stay close, the basket is placed within reach, the waste pile just beyond, the unfinished bundle under its cloth. A good arrangement saves small motions, and small saved motions matter across a long day. There is tenderness in the way workers adapt to their stations. A folded rag under one elbow, a preferred place near light but not draught, a habit of turning the basket slightly after each bundle, a way of wiping the table at the pores. These are not grand inventions, but they make the day livable. We have all known some version of this, the little adjustments by which a person makes a corner of work bearable, familiar, almost their own. The factory may have rules and the employer may own the room, but the worker still develops private customs within the allowed space. You may keep the ribs especially neat. You may smooth each stripped half before laying it down. You may count in groups without meaning to, not allowed, only in the quiet measure of the hand. Someone else may work faster, someone cleaner, someone with less waste, someone with a song under their breath. The room is full of such small signatures. Tobacco stripping is repetitive, but repetition is not emptiness. Repetition can be a form of listening. The leaf tells you when it is ready. The room tells you when the air is drying. The body tells you when to shift weight. The basket tells you how far the day has gone. We listen with you, calmly, without forcing meaning where simple attention is enough. The world grows very small and very detailed, and that smallness can be kind. In the 1900s, many industrial jobs were becoming more measured, more scheduled, and more connected to systems of production that stretched beyond the worker's sight. Yet handwork remained everywhere, especially in tasks where natural materials refused perfect uniformity. Tobacco leaves were not stamped from metal. They varied with weather, soil, curing, packing, and age. Your hands were needed because variation requires judgment, and judgment, in this room, arrived through touch. The hands also carry the cost of the day. By evening, they may ache. Tiny cracks may hold stain, the joints may feel full. Warm water may soothe them, but it may not remove the feeling that they are still working. In bed, a Bremen tobacco stripper might sense the ghost of the movement, thumb and finger finding the rib again in the dark. Many repetitive jobs leave such echoes. The mill worker hears wheels. The telegraph operator hears clicks. The tobacco stripper feels the leaf parting in the hands. There is no need to make that haunting unpleasant. Sometimes, the body's memory is simply a lullaby made from labor. It repeats what it knows. It smooths the day into pattern. And if sleep comes while the hands still remember, perhaps the last waking image is not of effort, but of a leaf opening cleanly, with the rib lifting free and the two soft halves laid in their proper place. And as the imagined movement of the hands grows slower, we turn toward the people who shared the tobacco room, because no quiet job is ever only a task. It is also a room full of lives moving side by side. The Bremen tobacco stripper works among others, and the room's calm is made not by silence alone, but by the careful nearness of people who understand the same routine. In the morning they arrive with coats damp from fog, shawls smelling faintly of smoke, boots carrying grit from the street, and faces still holding the private quiet of early hours. They do not need to greet one another loudly. A nod, a small remark about rain, a place taken at the table, and the day begins to gather itself. Some workers may be young, still learning how to keep pace without tearing too much leaf. Some may be older, with hands that seem to know the work before the eyes have looked down. The older worker may show the younger one how to ease a stubborn rib, not through a lecture, but by taking one leaf, turning it slightly, and pulling with a slower, angled motion. Like this, she might say, and then the lesson returns to quiet. We can imagine the younger worker trying again, carefully, while the room continues around her. The social world of the tobacco room is woven from fragments. A few words before the overseer passes, a shared bit of thread, a warning that one bundle is dry, a cup moved aside before it spills. Someone notices when another worker looks pale, or when a cough lingers, or when a usual song does not arrive. These are modest forms of attention, but they matter in a long working day. People who labor side by side often learn one another through signs too small for official records. Bremen's tobacco workers belong to households, streets, churches, clubs, unions, families, and boarding rooms, not only to factories. After work, the same hands that strip leaves might mend stockings, carry coal, wash dishes, hold a child, count coins, or write a letter with stiff fingers. It simply shaped part of the day, leaving traces in smell, tiredness, wages, and habit. We keep that wider life nearby, even while we remain at the table. There may be a window where workers prefer to stand during a pause, not because the view is beautiful in any formal way, but because the eyes need distance after hours of leaf in hand. A roofline, a chimney, a strip of sky, the top of a warehouse crane, a gull turning over the river, these can be enough. You look outward, and the city gives you a small rest. The eyes soften, the shoulders lower. Then the room calls you back through the simple fact of unfinished work. The sounds of companionship can be soothing when they are familiar. Cloth rustling, a chair creaking, someone clearing the throat, a basket being set down with care. Low voices moving under the larger quiet. We hear no performance in them. They are not placed there for effect. They belong to people passing through the day together, each carrying private thoughts, while sharing the same air, the same dust, the same table height, the same afternoon light. There may be disagreements, of course, because real rooms contain real temperaments. Someone may resent a poor batch. Someone may feel another has taken the better light. Someone may think the tally unfair. Yet the sleepful version of this truth does not need sharpness. Most frictions in a working room are absorbed by routine, softened by necessity, and carried along because the next leaf must still be stripped. The task itself becomes a kind of common ground. In such a room, stories travel slowly. A marriage, a sickness, a rent increase, a son apprenticed somewhere, a daughter leaving service, a ship delayed, a rumor of changes in the factory. These stories do not halt the work, they enter it. A worker speaks while stripping, pauses to find the rib, continues while laying the halves aside, and the listener answers without looking up. Conversation and labor braid together, neither fully separate from the other. We might notice how often quiet jobs depend on this shared patience. The lockkeeper waits for boats. The typesetter sets letters one by one. The lamplighter follows the streets at dusk. The tobacco stripper prepares leaves by hand. And though the job is indoors and repetitive, it has the same patient quality. It asks a person to accept the pace of necessary things. Not everything can be rushed without damage. Some tasks must be done in the time they require. The Bremen tobacco stripper, then, is part of a community of slow workers, not because life allowed endless leisure, but because the material demanded steadiness. Leaf, flame, ink, rope, grain, glass, wool, and wood all have their own ways of refusing haste. The worker learns those refusals and makes peace with them. We can take that lesson softly tonight. To move slowly is not always to be idle. Sometimes it is the only way to do the work well. And as the voices in the tobacco room fade into the steady hush of many hands, we turn toward the changing light of evening again, where the factory begins to loosen its hold and the city receives its workers back. By late day, the Bremen tobacco stripper's table has become a record of hours, though no clock face can show it as clearly as the piles and stains before you. The unfinished bundle is smaller now. The strip leaf lies in a soft mound, not beautiful in the polished sense, but satisfying in its order. The ribs have made their separate heap. The cloth that covered the tobacco in the morning is darker with damp and handling. Your apron holds the day in marks and creases. The room's air has thickened, and even the light seems to move more slowly through it. Dust turns briefly visible near the window, then disappears when a shoulder passes. The stove gives less comfort now because bodies and work have warmed the space, and the thought of outside coolness begins to feel pleasant. You roll one shoulder, then the other, perhaps when no one is watching, and the relief is small but real. We are near the end, though not yet beyond it. Endings in workrooms often have their own order. No one simply stops in the middle of a motion. The leaf in the hand is finished, the pile is squared, the basket is taken up or covered. The table is cleared of scraps, the damp cloth is wrung or folded, the tally is checked. These motions tell the body that the day is closing, and the body listens. Even before the door opens, you begin to feel the shape of evening. The final leaves may require extra care, because tired hands can become impatient. This is one of the small tests of repetitive labor. The first hour asks you to begin. The last hour asks you to remain gentle when you would rather be done. You slow the pull slightly. You watch the rib. You lay the halves aside. We stay with that care because it is a quiet kind of discipline, and it belongs to countless workers whose names have not been preserved. Perhaps a bell sounds, or perhaps the signal is less formal. A word from the forewoman, a movement toward the storage shelves, a general shift in posture that passes through the room. People know. The tables begin to empty. The day's brown abundance is gathered into containers that will move onward, while the room itself prepares to rest. The smell remains deep in the boards and cloths, and it will greet everyone again in the morning as if it never left. When you remove the apron, the body feels both lighter and more exposed. The work garment has carried dust that your dress or shirt did not have to carry, and folding it is almost like folding part of the day away. Your fingers may hesitate at the ties because tired fingers can be clumsy with knots. Someone beside you may already be buttoning a coat. Someone else may be searching under the bench for a dropped glove. These little delays are the soft clutter of leaving. The factory door opens, and the air outside comes in cool and damp, smelling of Bremen's evening streets. It has river mist in it, coal smoke, horse leather, wet stone, and perhaps the faint bakery warmth from a street away. After the tobacco room, every outside smell seems separate again. You step over the threshold, and the sound changes too, from enclosed murmurs to wider echoes, from leaf and wood to wheels, footsteps, distant bells, and the breathing of the port. Walking home is part of the job's rhythm, though it is not paid and not counted. The hands hang empty, the shoulders settle under the coat, the feet know the way past brick walls. Shop windows, yards, and narrow passages where evening gathers early. We walk beside you without needing to hurry. The city is neither grand nor small in this moment. It is simply the place that holds the worker after work, giving back air, distance, and the possibility of rest. At home or in a lodging, the tobacco scent may be noticed before anything else. It comes from the hair, the cuffs, the skin, the folded apron if it has been carried. Water is warmed if there is fuel and time. Hands are washed again. Supper waits or must be made. Coins may be set aside. A lamp may be lit. The workday becomes domestic, softened by walls of another kind, and yet the leaf remains faintly present, as if a little of the factory has crossed the city with you. There is something tender in the way ordinary labor dissolves into ordinary evening. No great announcement marks it. The world does not pause to honor a basket of stripped tobacco, but the worker feels the day in the body, and that is its own record. The back remembers. The hands remember, the breath remembers the room. We do not need a monument when we have paid attention. For tonight, attention is enough. And as the evening settles fully over Bremen and the warehouses darken beside the river, we let the work grow quieter still, until only the resting tools and covered leaves remain. Inside the factory, after leaving, the tobacco room holds the shape of the day without the people who made it. Tables stand in rows, dull under the last light. Baskets rest where they have been placed. Damp cloths lie over unfinished bundles, guarding the moisture until morning. A stray rib remains near a table leg, too small to matter, yet still part of the day's brown weather. The stove clicks softly as it cools, and the windows reflect the room back to itself. We can imagine returning there in thought, not to work again, but to let the scene settle. The air no longer moves with voices and sleeves. The tobacco smell deepens in stillness, earthy, sweet, bitter, and faintly smoky, as though many fields had been folded into one quiet room. The boards keep their stains. The knives, if used, rest with their handles turned toward no one. The tally book is closed. The room is waiting, but it is not impatient. A Bremen tobacco stripper would know this waiting without naming it. Tomorrow, the same room will open. The same tables will receive the same kind of bundles. Different leaves, perhaps, from a different bale or grade, but the same central gesture will return. Find the rib. Ease it free. Sort the leaf. Keep the pile clean. The repetition extends beyond one worker and one day, passing through weeks, seasons, and years, until a whole trade is held together by motions almost too small to notice. Tonight, we notice them. We notice the damp edge of the leaf, the faint stain on the thumb, the cool window glass, the scrape of a chair, the low voice asking for more cloth, the soft thud of a full basket placed near the wall. We notice the way a person's body becomes skilled through patient return. We notice the quiet link between a port city and a factory table, between far fields and Bremen fog, between trade and touch. The job itself may seem humble, and in many ways it was. It did not ask for a title carved in brass. It did not produce a single object with one maker's name proudly attached. But it required endurance, judgment, and care, and those are not small things. Many of the world's useful processes have depended on people doing modest work well, again and again, without applause. There is peace in admitting that. There is also respect. As sleep comes nearer, the details can loosen from history and become simple images. A long table under grey light, a bundle of softened leaves beneath a damp cloth, hands moving slowly, ribs set aside, a basket filling. Outside, Bremen's river mist touching the brick walls, while somewhere in the distance a bell marks an hour that no one in the resting room needs to answer. The day has been counted, and the work has been covered. You do not have to hold the whole story now. You can let it narrow to the most ordinary motion, the thumb finding the rib and the leaf parting cleanly, one side and then the other. We have followed the Bremen tobacco stripper through the morning chill, the mid-morning rhythm, the pause for bread, the afternoon sorting, and the evening release. The room is quiet now, the tools are where they belong, and so are you. And even in that quiet, after the last footstep has gone down the stair, the room keeps a faint memory of hands in the softened leaves. The covered bundles breathe a little under their cloths. Not truly alive, of course, but holding moisture as wool holds warmth. If you stood near the table now, in the dimness after work, you would still smell the day's labor rising from the boards. It would be sweet at first, then bitter, then earthy, like rain in a shed where old tools have been stored. The Bremen tobacco stripper belongs to this after silence as much as to the busy hours, because work is never only the moment when fingers are moving. It is also the way the table waits for you before dawn, and the way your place seems to remain after you leave it. The chair knows the angle of your body. The floorboards know the shift of your weight. The window nearest the table knows the brief upward glance you give it when the leaf dust dries your throat, and your eyes need the small grey mercy of distance. In the morning, when the door opens again, Bremen will still be damp around the edges, and the old factory will receive its workers with its familiar coolness. You might arrive before the light has fully settled, with the street still holding the night's wet shine between the cobbles. A cart may pass slowly, its wheels pressing water from the stones, while a horse's harness gives a soft leather creak. You pull your coat closer at the collar, not because the cold is severe, but because the river air has a patient way of finding every opening. Inside, the tobacco room is not yet warm, and that early chill makes the smell of the leaf sharper, cleaner, almost green beneath the deeper brown. We take our place again among the tables, where yesterday's order has become today's beginning. The covered bundles are uncovered one by one, and the damp cloths lift with a soft sound, releasing a breath of stored tobacco into the grey air. You feel the first leaf between your fingers, testing whether it has kept its pliancy overnight, and the day begins where the last one ended, with touch. There is a careful art to waking a material without spoiling it, and the Bremen tobacco stripper learns that art through ordinary repetition. If a bundle has dried at the edges, the outer leaves must be handled cautiously, because they may crack before the rib comes free. If the cloth has held too much damp, the leaf may cling to itself and darken, requiring slower separation and more watchful sorting. We notice these things quietly, as a worker notices them, not as lessons written in a book, but as facts carried in the fingers. The first hour asks you to settle into the body again, and that settling happens in small stages, almost too subtle to name. The shoulders lower, the elbows find their place near the ribs, the thumb rests against the stem with a known pressure. The basket shifts closer by an inch. The mind, still half among home thoughts, steps back into the narrow path of the work, and the room begins to gather a steady rhythm around you, leaf after leaf, breath after breath. A Bremen tobacco stripper in the 1900s would often know the difference between morning hands and afternoon hands. Morning hands are cautious, cooler, more aware of each touch, while afternoon hands may be faster, warmer, and more trusting touch. While afternoon hands may be faster, of habit, neither is better in every way. The morning protects the leaf from clumsiness, and the afternoon protects the worker from thinking too hard about every repeated motion. We drift with both, because both belong to the honest shape of the day. You may notice the table's edge pressing faintly into your skirt or apron as you lean forward, and that pressure becomes part of the station's geography. The smell of tobacco mixes with damp wool, floor dust, stove ash, and the metallic taste of the cold morning air still sitting near the windows. A worker nearby clears her throat and then says nothing more. Someone's fingers tap once against a basket rim. Outside, Bremen opens by degrees, with shutters, wheels, bells, and footsteps, but inside the room, the first work remains intimate and close. The leaves themselves seem almost endless when a bale has been opened, yet the hands meet them one at a time, because that is the only way such work can be done. You cannot strip a bale. You cannot strip a shipment. You can only strip this leaf, then this one, then the next. There is comfort in that small scale, and we can let it soften the mind, because many large things in life become gentler when they are returned to the hand's own measure. By mid-morning, the Bremen tobacco stripper's station has become its familiar little landscape of brown, tan, and pale fibrous lines. The unfinished leaves lie under cloth at one side, cool and slightly compressed. The stripped halves gather in a looser, softer heap, their edges curling where the room's air touches them. The ribs sit apart, tougher and lighter in color, with a faint woody smell when they are broken. You move between these small territories without thinking, and still the order remains exact. The factory's larger sounds begin to rise after the earliest quiet. A door opens below, a crate is dragged across boards, men's voices carry from a yard, softened by distance and brick. Somewhere in the building, a pulley complains under weight, then falls silent again. We hear these sounds as part of the same slow machine of labor, although your own work continues at the small scale of fingertips, where the true measure is not horsepower or tonnage, but whether a damp leaf parts cleanly along its central rib. A tobacco leaf has its own grain, and learning to follow it is a form of listening with the skin. The rib holds firmest near the base where the stem once fed the broader blade, and it narrows toward the tip where the leaf becomes more delicate. You learn to start with confidence, then ease your pull as the fibers thin. If you rush the last inch, the tip may tear into ragged pieces, and though the loss is small, the habit would be poor. Good work is made of such small refusals to be careless. The Bremen tobacco stripper may not speak of beauty often, but beauty is present in a practical way. It is in the evenness of a stripped piece, the clean line where rib and leaf have parted, the soft fall of prepared tobacco into a basket. It is in the way a dark leaf shows amber near the edge when held against the window. It is in the pale dust left on the fingertips, the curve of a stem, the quiet satisfaction of a table kept tidy through steady labor. We can imagine a forewoman pausing beside your station, her own hands perhaps once trained in the same work, her eyes moving over the piles with more understanding than her few words revealed. She sees whether the leaf is being wasted. She sees whether the ribs are too heavy with usable blade. She sees whether your finished heap is clean enough for the next room. The inspection is brief, but it confirms the invisible standard that holds the work together. And when she moves on, you return to the leaf with the same calm pace. The day is built from repetition, yet the repetition is never perfectly uniform, and that gentle variation keeps the hands awake without waking the spirit too sharply. A thicker leaf asks for strength. A thin one asks for delicacy. A dry edge asks for patience. A damp fold asks to be opened slowly. You answer each one in turn, and the room teaches a quiet truth through the body that steadiness is not stiffness, and routine is not the absence of attention. As the morning lengthens toward the meal pause, the air warms and the windows begin to lose their cloudy film from the inside. You can smell the stove more clearly now, a faint iron heat beneath the tobacco and damp cloth. Someone unwraps bread before the proper pause, and then wraps it again, perhaps embarrassed, perhaps only hungry. We let the moment pass gently, because hunger was part of factory time too, as ordinary as dust in the cuff and ache in the thumb. When the pause comes, it enters the room like a loosening thread, not all at once, but through many little changes. The Bremen tobacco stripper finishes the leaf in hand before stepping back, because leaving a leaf half-stripped feels wrong after so many hours of completing the same motion. You wipe your fingers on the apron, though it only moves the stain from skin to cloth. A mug is lifted, a heel shifts on the board. The room, still fragrant and dim, becomes briefly a place for bodies rather than only hands. You taste your bread with tobacco still faintly on your fingers, and the mixture is one of those working details that would be easy to forget if no one spoke of it. The bread is dense, sour, and grounding, with a crust that pulls slightly against the teeth. The drink is warm if you are fortunate, and even when thin, it comforts the throat that has been breathing dust. You sit with the others, perhaps on a bench, perhaps on a crate, and the body receives the simple fact that it is not moving for a few minutes. The talk in the room is low, because rest does not always need conversation. A name is mentioned, a price is compared. Someone says the weather may turn by evening, and someone else says it has already turned, because her knee knows it. We smile with them softly, not at them, but beside them, because such ordinary remarks are how workers place themselves in the day. Outside, the world may be governed by markets and ships, but inside the pause, it is governed by bread, weather, and whether the stove will hold. A Bremen tobacco stripper may use the pause to look at her hands, and hands seen during rest can seem almost separate from the person who owns them. The fingertips are darkened, the nails hold brown traces, fine fibers cling near the creases. A small nick may sting when touched by damp tobacco later, Yet the hands are also capable, and their tiredness has a kind of earned calm. They have done the morning's work, and they will do the afternoon's work, because that is how the day continues. The pause ends without ceremony, and perhaps that is why it feels so true. No bell needs to be grand, no speech needs to be made. The bread is wrapped, the mug is set aside, and the hands return to the leaf. We move with you into the next stretch of labor, where the room is warmer, the air fuller, and the mind more willing to drift in the safe channel of a task it understands. By noon, the Bremen tobacco stripper's work has become deeply bodily, and the room's rhythm seems to pass through everyone at once. You lift, feel, split, draw, lay aside, and reach again, while the day outside brightens without ever becoming truly bright. The light has a northern softness, filtered by warehouse walls and river mist, and it falls on the brown leaves as if the whole room were kept inside a muted jar of amber. We breathe slowly with it, letting the leaf's quiet color settle the eyes. Some batches may carry a scent that is almost sweet, especially after moistening, while others smell sharper, earthier, or faintly peppery in the nose. You learn not to judge too quickly by smell alone, though smell tells you much. A musty note may warn of poor storage. A fresh dampness may mean the leaf will handle easily. A deep cured sweetness may suggest a richer tobacco meant for better use. These distinctions arrive without fuss, like weather signs read by someone who has walked the same road for years. The industrial process around you depends on this patient discrimination, even when the worker's name does not travel with the finished product. In another room, cut tobacco may be blended for consistency, or cigar workers may prepare bunches and wrappers with their own practiced movements. If your stripping is careless, their work becomes harder. If your sorting is clean, their hands can move with more confidence. The factory is made from linked attentions, and each quiet station passes either ease or difficulty to the next. We might think of the Bremen tobacco stripper as standing at a threshold between nature and manufacture. The leaf is no longer a plant in a field, but it has not yet become a product with a label. It is between states, softened and opened, judged and prepared. Your hands help it cross that threshold. There is something restful in the thought, because thresholds are often noisy in stories, while this one is made of damp cloth, stained fingertips, and a rib drawn slowly away. At times the room may grow too warm, and the tobacco's heaviness can settle in the head. You might turn slightly toward the window for cooler air, catching the smell of wet brick and river mud beneath the factory scent. The contrast clears the senses. Then the leaf returns, close and brown with its fibrous middle and tender edge. We learn again how workers lived between inner and outer weather, between the controlled dampness of the room and the natural dampness of Bremen outside. The city's tobacco trade would not have seemed quaint to those inside it. It was work, income, pressure, and routine. Yet from this quiet distance, we can see the tenderness in its details without pretending the work was easy. The ache was real. The wages mattered. The dust entered the throat. The hours could be long. And still, within those plain facts, there were moments of texture, companionship, skill, and calm that deserve to be noticed with care. The afternoon's first stretch often has a slightly dreamlike quality because the body has eaten, the room is warm, and the task is known. You may find that thoughts pass slowly through you, unhurried and incomplete. A remembered tune, the image of laundry hanging in a courtyard, the face of someone seen that morning on the tram or street, a worry about rent, a hope for Sunday. The hands continue, and the thoughts drift behind them like low clouds over the Weser. A difficult leaf brings you back when needed. The rib catches. The edge tears. The dampness is wrong. Your fingers pause, adjust, and begin again with a more delicate pull. This is the kindness of handwork for a wandering mind. It allows drifting but not complete absence. It calls you back through touch rather than alarm. We can let that calling be gentle, just enough to keep the task alive and the listener anchored in the warm tobacco room. The Bremen tobacco stripper works in a world of material limits, where every object has a proper state and every process has its timing. The cloth must be damp, but not wet. The leaf must be pliant, but not soggy. The room must be warm enough for handling, but not so dry that edges crack. The worker must be quick enough to earn the day, but careful enough to preserve the value of the leaf. These balances are quiet, but they shape everything. As the afternoon grows older, the light begins to lower again, and the room's colors deepen from brown and amber into brown and gray. You may notice that the same leaf looks different now than it did in the morning, not because it has changed, but because the light has. The ribs seem paler, the finished heap seems darker, the dust at the window seems thicker. We notice these changes with you because long work teaches the eye to read time in small alterations. Near the end of the day, fatigue becomes a material in the room, almost as present as tobacco itself. It changes posture, slows conversation, and makes each worker more careful in a different way. One person grows quiet, another grows slightly restless. You may become very precise, as if precision itself will carry you through the final bundle. The leaf still asks the same thing, and you answer. Though now the answer comes from deeper in the body. The Bremen tobacco stripper's last hour is not a grand conclusion, but a soft narrowing. The day's concerns reduced to what remains on the table, a bundle under the cloth, a basket nearly full, a waste pile to clear, a stain on the thumb, a dull ache in the wrists. Outside, carts may be turning homeward, shopkeepers may be drawing in goods from the pavement, and lamps may be appearing one by one in the damp Bremen streets. But in here, the leaf still holds your gaze. There is a peaceful honesty in ending with small tasks. Cover what must be kept, move what must be moved, sweep what has fallen, count what must be counted. The mind accepts these final acts because they are shaped like care. We do not leave the room in disorder, we leave it ready to become itself again. This is a kind of promise made by workers to their own tomorrow, even when tomorrow will ask much the same as today. When the tables are cleared, the room's true age becomes easier to see. Stains darken the boards where years of tobacco have passed. Corners hold dust no broom entirely reaches. Window frames swell a little from damp seasons. The wall near the stove has taken a faint smoke tint. You look at these things not as a visitor might, but as someone who belongs to the room for part of each day. Someone who has learned its moods through weather, batch, and hour. A coat is lifted from its peg, and the outside air is already waiting in the cloth. You slip your arms into it, feeling the brief chill of the lining before your body warms it. The tobacco smell rises once more as the apron is folded, and for a moment the day seems gathered into that one square of stained fabric. We stand beside you as you turn toward the door, carrying no leaf now, only the imprint of leafwork in your fingers and back. The Bremen street receives you with a cool breath. Evening mist lies close to the ground, softening the lower edges of carts, boots, and doorways. The cobbles are uneven underfoot, and small puddles hold dim reflections of windows and lamps. You hear a bell from somewhere beyond the warehouses, broad and slow, and the sound spreads through the damp air without hurry. After the enclosed tobacco room, the city feels wide, even in a narrow lane. Walking after factory work is a slow unwinding. The shoulders remember that they no longer need to lean. The hands remember that they can hang still. The eyes, which have been close to leaves all day, travel farther now, touching roof lines, chimneys, signs, clouds, and the pale strip of sky above the street. We walk with you in that release step by step, letting the factory fall behind without disappearing entirely. Because the day remains in the body even as the door closes. You may pass other workers whose trades announce themselves in different ways. A dock laborer carries rope fibers on his sleeve. A bakery boy smells faintly of yeast and heat. A seamstress bends her head under the weight of a long day's concentration. A clerk holds his satchel close against the damp. Bremen is full of such endings at this hour, and each person carries a private room away from the place where they worked. At home, the ordinary tasks of evening begin, and they have their own quiet industrial rhythm, smaller but no less real. Coal is coaxed, water is poured, a pan is set down, a lamp is trimmed, a button is loosened, a basin is filled. Your hands, so exact with tobacco, become domestic hands again, though they do not fully lose the day's brown scent. Soap touches the skin, warm water loosens dust, and still a trace remains, faint and stubborn, under the nails and in the fine lines of the palm. Supper may be simple, and simple food after repetitive work can feel deeply sufficient. Potatoes, bread, cabbage, soup, or a small piece of meat if the week allows it, each one carries warmth into the tired body. You sit where you can. You listen to the sounds of the building, footsteps above, a door below, pipes, voices, a child being quieted, someone laughing softly behind a wall. The tobacco room is no longer around you, but its rhythm has slowed your own movements. And the evening accepts that slowness. There might be mending to do, because clothing in working households rarely repaired itself and rarely waited for perfect energy. A cuff, a stocking, a seam opened by use. The needle is lighter than the tobacco leaf, but the fingers may be less nimble now. We see you pause, flex the hand, and continue. The same patience follows you from factory to home, not because patience is endless, but because life has taught it many uses. By the time the lamp burns lower, Bremen outside has settled into a darker quiet, with occasional wheels and voices passing like brief currents through the night. The river is somewhere beyond the walls, moving without needing to be seen. Warehouses stand full of cargo. The tobacco factory rests. Undercloths, the leaves wait in their careful dampness. Neither field nor finished product, just held for morning. You may think of them for a moment, or not think of them at all, as sleep begins to smooth the edges of the day. The Bremen tobacco stripper's dreams, if they come, need not be vivid. They may be made of touch more than picture. A leaf folding open, a rib lifting free, a soft heap growing beside the hand, a window pale with mist, a table waiting in grey light. Work can enter sleep this way, stripped of pressure and wages, softened into pattern, until the task becomes almost a cradle for the mind. And in the quiet before morning, when the city is still and the factory is only a darker shape among darker shapes, the leaves keep their moisture under cloth, the tables keep their stains, and the tools lie where tired hands place them. The room does not ask anything yet, the worker does not answer yet. For a little while, everything rests in its proper place, and the long journey of the tobacco leaf pauses peacefully in Bremen's sleeping air. Morning returns, not as a command, but as a gradual paling of the windows, and Bremen begins to gather itself from the river mist again. Before the tobacco room fills with voices, before the stove has warmed its iron belly, before the first basket is moved into place, the factory holds that cool, suspended hour when everything seems to be waiting for hands. You arrive inside that waiting with your coat still damp at the hem, and with the ordinary thoughts of sleep, bread, weather, and work still loosely folded together in your mind. The Bremen tobacco stripper's first task is not always the leaf itself, but the preparation of the space where the leaf will be handled. The table must be cleared of yesterday's overlooked fragments, the basket set where the arm can reach it without strain, and the damp cloth lifted just enough to test the condition of the bundle beneath. You touch the top leaves lightly, not taking them yet, only listening through the fingertips for dryness, spring, cling, and wait. The room seems to lean closer around that first touch. A properly conditioned bundle has a softness that is neither fresh nor decayed, but something between. A working softness shaped by storage, moisture, and time. The leaves yield when pressed, then rise back slightly, and their scent opens more fully as the cloth is drawn aside. It is a warm brown smell, even in a cold room with hints of earth, old sugar, damp rope, and cellar boards. You breathe it in because there is no avoiding it, and after long enough, the smell becomes less like an intrusion and more like the day's first weather. The rib at the center of the leaf is firm under the thumb, and it tells a small history of the plant's former life. Once it held the leaf outward to the sun. Once it carried water upward and strength outward through the blade. Now, in the quiet Bremen room, it is the part to be removed, the useful structure made unnecessary by the next stage of work. You do not think all this in so many words, perhaps, but your hands act as if they understand it. The first split of the morning is slower than the 10th, and the 10th is slower than the 100th will be. That is the way of the body. It enters the rhythm by degrees, testing its own strength and remembering the movement without forcing it. We stand beside you as the leaf opens, one side drawing away cleanly, the other holding for a moment before giving with a fibrous sigh. The rib falls aside, pale and slightly twisted, and the day has begun in earnest. Other workers take their places along the tables, each creating a small world of order from the same brown abundance. Coats are hung, sleeves arranged, aprons tied, stools shifted, cloths lifted, and for a while the whole room is made of beginnings. There is a softness to these first minutes, because everyone is still settling into themselves. Voices are low. The stove catches slowly. The windows hold back the grey morning. Outside, Bremen's streets carry the muted sound of hooves and wheels. But inside, the leaf has the closest claim. The Bremen tobacco stripper learns to protect strength, because a long day cannot be met with force alone. You do not grip every leaf as if it were a stubborn thing. You let most of them tell you how they wish to part. The thumb presses, the fingers guide, the wrist turns slightly, and the motion spends only as much effort as it must. This economy is not laziness, it is wisdom taught by repetition, the kind that keeps a worker's hands useful through hour after hour. A new worker might waste herself early, pulling too hard, leaning too close, trying to prove speed before her fingers have learned care. By afternoon, that hurry becomes ache. The experienced worker knows better. She begins evenly, letting the first basket grow without strain, and she keeps the unfinished leaves covered so they remain pliant. We can feel the calm intelligence of that approach, because every repetitive job has its hidden arithmetic of energy, where one careless motion repeated all day becomes a debt the body must pay. The table surface is smooth in the middle and rougher near the edges, where old nicks have darkened with dust and use. Your fingertips know which place catches a torn leaf and which place lets it slide easily into the finished pile. A small groove near the front has collected brown stain until it looks almost polished. Nothing about the table is decorative, yet it has the intimate presence of a thing used faithfully. It is not yours, exactly, but for the hours of work, it holds your habits. The leaves at the top of the bundle are sometimes easier than those pressed deeper down. The lower ones may be more compacted, their folds holding moisture unevenly, their edges tucked against one another like pages in a damp book. You separate them carefully, because pulling two at once can tear both and make a muddle of the pile. The motion is delicate, almost like lifting thin fabric from a drawer, except the fabric carries the smell of fields, curing sheds, sea passage, warehouse air, and Bremen's own damp breath. As the room warms, the factory begins to sound less empty. Footsteps pass overhead or below, and a door closes with a soft wooden finality. Somewhere a scale may be used, its metal parts clicking faintly, and somewhere a crate may be opened with a pry of iron. These sounds remind you that your table is one station in a larger process, but they do not pull you away from the leaf. They simply deepen the room around you, like low notes under a steady song. The Bremen tobacco stripper's work is often described by the verb alone, stripping, as if one word could hold the whole day. But inside that word are many small actions: selecting, opening, feeling, separating, smoothing, sorting, stacking, covering, waiting, and beginning again. We can let the word widen quietly tonight, until it has room for the temperature of the floor, the worn place on the apron, the weight of damp cloth, and the thin brown dust that gathers in the crease between thumb and finger. By the second hour, your hands have darkened again, and the first clean feeling of morning has given way to the familiar stain of work. It does not trouble you much. It is expected. Tobacco marks everything it passes through, from bale cloth to warehouse floor, to factory table to skin. You may rub one thumb against the other and feel the slight tackiness left by the leaf, a resinous trace that soak will lessen later, but not entirely remove. For now it belongs to the day. The room's light changes in a way that only workers who remain in one place can truly observe. At first, the window is a dull square. Then it becomes a grey pane with faint streaks. Later, the upper edge brightens, and a line of pale light reaches the table legs, not warm enough to cheer the room, but enough to show dust floating in the air. You look up only briefly, yet the eyes receive the change with gratitude. Then the next leaf comes into the hand. There is a small pause whenever a bundle is finished, a pause so brief that an outsider might not notice it. You draw the empty cloth or string aside, square the finished pile, check the waist, and reach for the next bundle with a sense of crossing a tiny border. The day is made of these borders. They give shape to time without interrupting it too sharply. We move across them with you, gently, because each one says that some portion of the work has been completed. A bundle from one bale may behave differently from the last, and the change wakes the fingers. This one is drier along the edges. That one is heavier near the stem. Another has leaves so wide they fold over the palm, while another is smaller, more brittle, and more likely to tear near old insect marks or rough curing lines. You adjust without complaint. The job is never quite the same twice, and yet it remains the same enough to carry the mind. By now, the Bremen tobacco stripper is part of the room's rhythm, not standing apart from it. Your movement joins the neighbor's movement, and the neighbor's joins another's, until the tables seem to breathe in a slow, shared pattern. Leaf lifts, leaf parts, rib falls, fingers return, cloth shifts, basket fills. The sequence is plain, but when it is multiplied across the room, it becomes a kind of quiet industry, human in scale and steady enough to soothe the ear. The scent grows heavier before the meal pours, because more leaves have been opened and handled, and the air has less cold in it to keep smells sharp and separate. Tobacco now seems to rest on the tongue as much as in the nose. It mingles with wool, starch, soap, stove heat, and the faint mineral scent of damp walls. We stay with that thickness patiently, because industrial rooms were often known first through the air, and the air told workers where they were before their eyes had fully adjusted. Your body begins to ask for rest in modest ways. The back would like to straighten, the fingers would like warm water, the feet would like a different floor, but the asking is quiet, and the work answers only when the pause arrives. Until then, one more leaf can be finished, and then one more after that. This is not heroism. It is simply the way ordinary labor extends itself, through small, manageable continuations that add up to a morning. When the meal pause finally opens, the Bremen tobacco stripper steps back from the table with the strange feeling that the room is still moving without her. The hands stop, but the rhythm seems to remain in the wrists. You unwrap bread, perhaps with a little cheese or a scrape of fat, and for a few minutes the leaf becomes background rather than foreground. The bread has its own smell, sour and dense, and the act of eating brings the body back from the narrow focus of the hands into the broader needs of hunger, warmth, and sitting. Someone near the stove speaks about a neighbor's rent, and another worker answers with a soft sound that is almost agreement and almost weariness. These conversations are not meant to entertain the room. They are small exchanges of fact and feeling, placed between bites, carried by people who must return to the same table soon enough. You listen without needing to add much. The room allows such silence because shared work often makes speech optional in a way that feels less lonely than silence alone. A younger worker may be rubbing her thumb where the rib has pressed it raw, and an older one may offer a strip of cloth or a practical suggestion. Not tenderly in a dramatic sense, but matter-of-factly, because bodies at work require maintenance like tools do. We notice the gesture and let it be enough. Care in such rooms is often brief, useful, and unsentimental, yet it still warms the scene like a small coal kept under ash. Outside the window, Bremen's day has become fully itself. The river traffic continues beyond the buildings, though you may hear it only in softened pieces. A horn, a shout, a rolling cart, a chain struck against wood. The city does not pause because the tobacco room pauses, but its sounds seem more distant while you eat. You look through the glass, and the glass holds both the outside world and the faint reflection of workers seated among tables. For a moment, both worlds lie over each other. The pause closes as simply as it opened. Bread is wrapped, mugs are lowered, stools scrape, cloths are lifted, and the tobacco returns to the hands. This return has a certain gentleness after food, because the body is steadier and the mind has loosened. You take the next leaf with less thought than before. The rib finds your thumb. The edge slips between fingers. We pass back into the work without a door between rest and labor, only a soft change in posture and attention. The afternoon in the Bremen tobacco room has a slower, deeper pulse than the morning. It is not sleepy exactly, though sleep may brush the edges of the mind if the room is warm and the task very familiar. Rather, it is settled. The first uncertainty of the day has passed, the meal is behind you, and the remaining hours stretch ahead in a known line. You can feel the day's length, but you can also feel its end waiting somewhere beyond the next baskets. This is when the small craft of consistency matters most. You cannot let the finished pile become careless because the mind has drifted. You cannot let ribs carry too much good blade because your fingers are tired. You cannot leave leaves uncovered while speaking too long to a neighbor. So the body keeps watch in its quiet way, bringing you back whenever the work begins to blur. We can trust that watchfulness. It is one of the worker's hidden strengths. A shaft of light may reach the table for a short while if the weather allows, and in it, the tobacco shows colors that were invisible before. Brown becomes copper, ochre, umber, chestnut, and dull gold. Thin edges glow almost translucent. Thick ribs cast small shadows. You may not name the colors, but the eyes receive them, and the room feels briefly less gray. Then a cloud passes, or the sun shifts, and the leaf returns to its ordinary working brown. The Bremen tobacco strippers station carries evidence of judgment everywhere. The clean pieces lie together. Torn or damaged portions are kept apart if required. Ribs gather in their own place. Leaves waiting under cloth remain cool and pliant. Nothing about this arrangement would impress a visitor looking for machinery, yet it is the machinery of the hand made visible. Order is the tool here. Without it, the next process slows, quality suffers, and the quiet chain of work loses its smoothness. Sometimes a batch brings foreign bits from its travels, small crumbs of packing material, grit, broken stem, or dust from the bale. You pick these away as you find them, with a flick or a pinch, because the leaf's journey through the world has left traces that must not remain in the finished pile. Such fragments are small reminders of distance. The tobacco has crossed hands, floors, holds, ports, warehouses, and borders, and now the last tiny unwanted pieces are being removed by someone standing in Bremen light. The afternoon conversations become thinner as workers settle into endurance. Words cost energy by then, and many people save them. The room is not unfriendly. It is simply deep in the day. You may hear a tune hummed once and abandoned, a sleeve brushed against an apron, a cough softened into a handkerchief, a basket lifted with a quiet effort. These sounds make a companionship that does not ask to be named, and we rest in it as in a dim room with familiar walls. The tobacco stripper's wage may be counted elsewhere, but the worker counts the day through signs nearer than money. How many bundles finished, how much remains under cloth, how the back feels, how the light has moved, how long since the pause, whether the next bundle looks kind or troublesome. This counting is practical and intimate, and it is one reason repetitive labor can feel both endless and measurable at the same time. You are always in the middle, and yet the pile grows. As the final part of the afternoon approaches, the forewoman may begin to think ahead to storage, covering, tallying, and the next morning's condition. In tobacco work, stopping well is part of working well. Leaves left exposed may dry badly. Finished piles must not be confused. Waste must not drift into usable material. The room must be made ready not just for cleanliness, but for continuity. We feel that continuity gently, like a thread being tied rather than cut. Your hands, though tired, are now at their most knowing. They no longer hesitate at ordinary leaves. They spend attention only where attention is needed. A stubborn rib, a thin torn edge, a suspicious patch, a leaf too wet at the fold. This selective care is one mark of experience, because the worker has learned what can be trusted to habit and what must be met freshly. It is a calm kind of intelligence, distributed through fingers, eyes, shoulders, and pace. Near evening, Bremen's dampness returns to the window panes, and the room seems to draw inward again. The outside light cools. The stove becomes noticeable. Coats on pegs look less like objects and more like promises of leaving. You may glance towards yours once, then return to the table, because there is still a final stretch to complete. The leaf in front of you does not know the hour. It only knows whether you handle it well. The last bundles of the day can feel heavier than the first, even when they weigh the same. That heaviness lives in the worker, not the leaf. Still, the hands continue, perhaps more slowly but not carelessly. The rib comes away. The usable halves are laid down, the waste is kept apart. We remain with this simple order until it becomes almost meditative, a way of saying that the day can close without being rushed, and the work can end without being broken. When the signal to finish draws near, the room begins to change by degrees. Someone completes a bundle and does not open another. Someone carries a basket away. Someone shakes a cloth outside the main pile, careful not to scatter dust where it does not belong. The forewoman's notebook may open again, its pages pale against the brown room. A pencil moves. Names, marks, quantities, and measures gather the day into lines that will outlast the warmth of the hands that made them. You straighten slowly, and the body seems to rise through layers of its own fatigue. The lower back releases first, then complains. The shoulders shift under the blouse or shirt. The neck turns toward the window, and the eyes rest for a moment on distance. This small act of looking outward after close work feels like taking a deeper breath. We take it with you, quietly, letting the city reappear beyond the factory's intimate brown world. Cleaning the station is another kind of stripping, a removal of the day's loose remnants from the surface where tomorrow will begin. You brush ribs and scraps together, wipe dampness where it has gathered, fold cloths, set baskets straight, and make sure no good leaf has been left among waste. The table's worn grain emerges again from beneath the small disorder of labor. It will never look new, but it can look ready, and readiness has a calm beauty of its own. The apron comes untied at last, and as it loosens, the work seems to loosen its hold on the body. You fold it with stained fingers, perhaps not perfectly, but enough. The tobacco dust rises faintly and then settles. Your hands look darker against the cloth. Somewhere behind you, another worker laughs under her breath at something small, and the sound is tired but kind. It does not disturb the room. It only proves that people are still people after the tally is made. The doorway gives you back the outside air, and the first breath of it is cool enough to make the lungs notice. Bremen's evening has laid a film of moisture over stone, railing, handle, and step. The brick walls have darkened, and the sky above the warehouses has the soft grey blue of a day closing without spectacle. You step down with the others, not as a crowd in a hurry, but as a loosening thread of workers returning to streets, rooms, kitchens, errands, and rest. The smell of tobacco follows you, of course, and perhaps by now you no longer register it until someone else does. It sits in the coat and hair, mingling with coal smoke from chimneys and the damp mineral smell of the river. A child passing in a doorway might know the factory workers by scent, just as others are known by flour, fish, metal, or soap. The city reads its workers in this way, through traces carried on cloth, through posture, through the tired but steady walk toward home. As you walk, the hands begin to cool, and the tenderness of the fingertips becomes more noticeable without the leaf to occupy them. You may tuck them into sleeves or pockets, letting the warmth collect around the joints. The day's motion repeats faintly in them, thumb and finger closing on an absent rib, then opening again. We can feel that echo as a soft afterimage of labor, not troubling, only persistent, like the last line of a song remembered after the singing stops. Home may be up a stair, across a courtyard, along a narrow street, or in a room where several lives share heat and lamplight. Wherever it is, the transition from factory to evening asks its own patience. There may be water to carry, food to prepare, a fire to tend, clothing to mend, or simply the necessary work of being a body after wages have been earned. The Bremen tobacco stripper does not become idle when she leaves the stripping table. She only changes tasks. Still, there is a different softness in household work, even when it is tiring. The tobacco room belongs to production, tally, and trade, while the evening room belongs to warmth, repair, and the small needs of people close at hand. A pot lid lifts with a damp clink. A lamp flame steadies under glass. Bread is cut. A chair is drawn near. The day's factory smell remains in the sleeves, but it is slowly joined by supper, soap, coal, and the familiar air of home. When the hands are washed, the water takes the color of weak tea, and the basin receives what the skin is willing to release. Some stain remains. It always does. You rub gently at the nails, the knuckles, the thumb pads, and the lines across the palm. but the work has entered too finely to vanish in one washing. There is no shame in that. It is the visible proof of a day spent handling a material that leaves memory on everything it touches. Evening quiet is not perfect quiet. A neighbor's steps pass overhead. A door latch clicks. A cart rolls late along the street. Someone speaks in the stairwell, then lowers their voice. But compared with the factory, these sounds are spaced farther apart, leaving room between them. You sit for a moment, perhaps with mending in your lap or a cup held between both hands, and the body begins its slow return from repetitive motion to rest. In that return, the mind may wander back to the tobacco room with a softness that work itself did not always have. Memory removes some of the ache and leaves the images. The long table, the damp cloth, the color of a good leaf, the forewoman's pencil, the window whitening in morning and dimming at evening. We let those images drift because they are gentler now than they were in the hour of effort, and they can carry the listener towards sleep without asking anything more. The Bremen tobacco stripper's life, like most working lives, was made from many days that did not announce themselves as history while they were happening. Yet history lives in such days more faithfully than in ceremonies, because ordinary routines show how people truly met the world. They show what had to be touched, carried, sorted, endured, learned, and repeated. They show the price of goods in the body, not only in coins, and they show the quiet skill hidden inside tasks others rarely stop to imagine. Night gathers over the port, and the factory becomes still again. Under cloth, the leaves rest in their carefully kept dampness. The stripped tobacco waits in its proper place, ready for the next set of hands, the next room, the next stage of becoming something else. The ribs and scraps have been cleared, the tables have cooled, the windows hold only darkness now, with perhaps a faint reflection from a lamp outside or a late cart passing through mist. You do not need to follow the leaf farther tonight. You can let it remain there, covered and quiet, neither growing nor finished, simply held in a pause between labours. The Bremen tobacco stripper has done enough for one day, and we have stood beside the work long enough to feel its rhythm settle into our own breathing. Thumb, rib, leaf, basket, cloth, table, window, door. The pattern loosens as sleep comes nearer, but its calm remains. And while Bremen sleeps under damp roofs and low clouds, the tobacco room waits without impatience, holding its brown scent, its worn boards, its covered bundles, and its promise of another slow beginning. In that promise of another slow beginning, the first thing to return is not sound, but cold, the kind that sits overnight in brick and wood, and waits for footsteps. When the door opens, the room receives the morning air with a faint inward breath, and the tobacco smell, which never truly left, rises from the tables as if stirred from sleep. You step in with the others, quiet from the street, carrying the dampness of Bremen on your coat and the last softness of night in your eyes. The stove is coaxed back toward warmth, and for a while its heat is more suggestion than comfort. Someone kneels near it, perhaps, or bends to check the coal, and the small metal sounds travel farther than voices in the half-empty room. You untie your scarf, set down what you have brought, and take your place where the table has waited. The wood feels cool under your hands at first, and the first cloth you lift is cold enough to make the fingertips notice. The Bremen tobacco stripper begins again with the same small test of the leaves, because the night can change a bundle in ways the eye alone may miss. A leaf that was perfect yesterday might have dried along one edge, while another, folded deep under the cloth, may have held more moisture than was useful. You feel for spring, weight, and resistance. You separate the top leaves with care, and the room, still gathering its workers, seems to settle around the soft sound of tobacco parting from tobacco. There is no grand freshness in the factory morning, and that is part of its truth. The air is made from yesterday and today together. It holds old smoke, damp cloth, brown leaf, wet wool, floor dust, and the faint sourness of human work in closed rooms. Yet, it is not an ugly air when we enter it gently. It is an honest one, full of materials and bodies, full of tasks that have been done before and will be done again. A bundle is opened, and the leaves fan slightly under your hand, each one lying close to the next, as though reluctant to be singled out. You lift the first by its stem end and let it sag under its own damp weight. The main rib shows itself in a pale line, firmer than the blade, and your thumb finds the place to begin. Then comes the pull, not sharp, not hurried, but steady enough that the fibers understand the direction being asked of them. The first clean separation of the day has a quiet satisfaction that does not need anyone else to see it. The rib slides away almost whole, and the two sides of the leaf fall open with only a slight tear near the tip. You lay the usable pieces in their place and the rib in its place, and already the table has begun to divide the world into what belongs here and what belongs there. This is the calm grammar of the work, repeated until it becomes almost a second way of thinking. Across the room, other Bremen tobacco strippers make the same beginning, and the scattered motions slowly become one shared pulse. A chair creaks, a basket shifts, cloth slides over leaves, and someone breathes out through the nose in a small, private sigh. We can imagine the rhythm forming without anyone announcing it. The room does not need a leader for this part. It only needs workers who have returned enough times that the beginning knows how to begin itself. The light comes reluctantly through the windows, blurred by weather and factory glass. It touches the upper parts of the walls first, then the edges of tables, then the moving hands. The leaves look darker in this hour, almost black in their folds, and the pale ribs stand out more clearly. You work by the contrast as much as by touch, though touch remains the truest guide. A leaf may look willing and still resist, and another may look coarse yet part cleanly under a patient hand. The tobacco stripper learns not to argue with the material, because argument wastes strength and damages what it tries to control. If the rib clings, you change angle. If the leaf begins to tear, you stop and begin from another point. If it is too dry, you set it aside or cover it again, depending on the room's habit and the forewoman's rules. We follow these adjustments as they happen, quietly, because they are the real intelligence of the work. By the time Bremen's streets have fully awakened outside, the factory has already entered its own morning depth. The carts, bells, and voices beyond the walls are present but softened, while the table before you remains immediate. You smell the leaf as it opens, you feel the dampness darken your fingers, you hear the rib drop into the waste pile with a faint, dry tick. The city may be wide, but the working world is narrow enough now to fit between your hands. There is a tenderness in the way the worker's body makes room for repetition. At first, the task stands before you as something to be done. Then, after enough minutes, it moves inward and becomes something you are doing almost without separating yourself from it. Your shoulders settle into the nose slope, your breathing finds the pace of the hand, your thoughts loosen their grip on the morning's small concerns, and the day begins to carry you along its familiar channel. A neighbor may ask for more cloth, and the request passes softly across the table, followed by a hand reaching, a nod, and the quiet return to work. No one needs to make the moment larger than it is. The cloth itself is rough, damp, and darkened by use, with edges that have frayed from washing and handling. It is not only a covering, but a tool as essential as any knife, because moisture is one of the invisible measures by which the whole day succeeds or fails. The Bremen tobacco stripper works in a trade where natural things must be kept in balance after they have already been removed from nature. The leaf was once a living surface drinking sun and air. Now it is a stored material that must not become too dry, too wet, too brittle, or too slack. You do not need laboratory words to understand that balance. You understand it when a leaf cracks under the thumb, or when a damp fold sticks against itself and refuses to open cleanly. The room's warmth gradually gathers around ankles and knees before it reaches the hands. Near the stove, the air softens first, while the window side keeps a cooler breath, and workers learn these differences as part of the room's character. You may prefer one place in winter and another in milder weather. You may know which table catches the draft under the door, which corner holds smells most heavily, and which window gives the best light without chilling the fingers too much. Such knowledge is humble, but it is not trivial. To work well all day, you must understand the place as well as the task. You must know where to stand, where to set the basket, when to cover the leaves, when to ask for another bundle, when to stretch the back without losing pace. We can feel how these decisions gather over years, not as theories, but as the quiet common sense of someone who has survived many mornings at the same table. The first pause for the body may come before any official pause, only a slight straightening while the fingers remain busy. You lift the leaf closer instead of bending lower, and for a moment the back receives mercy. Then the work resumes its full posture. The relief is brief but real. In repetitive labor, small comforts matter because they are repeatable too, and a worker who learns them may carry herself through a day with less damage than one who ignores every signal until pain becomes loud. Outside, perhaps a light rain begins, touching the windows so softly that at first it is only visible as a dimming of the glass. The sound is almost lost under the room's own hush, but the feeling of it enters anyway. Bremen seems to draw nearer in rain, pressing its damp brick, river air and narrow lanes against the factory walls. The tobacco leaves, already creatures of moisture, seem at home in such weather. You work on, while the rain makes the morning smaller and more enclosed. A forewoman moves between the tables, her presence neither severe nor indulgent, simply part of the room's order. She may carry a small notebook, or she may rely on memory until the proper moment for tallying. Her eyes understand piles, speed, waste, and the condition of the leaf. When she pauses near you, the work continues, because stopping would draw more attention than simply doing the task well. The rib comes away, the leaf falls open, her steps move on. The middle of the morning brings a deeper steadiness, as if the whole room has accepted the day and no longer needs to negotiate with it. You are no longer beginning, and you are not yet tired enough to think of the end. This is the smoothest part of the work. When the hands are warm, the leaves still keep their moisture, and the piles grow with visible patience. We stay here for a while, because this is where the sleepful rhythm of the occupation lives most fully. Leaf after leaf, the same central line appears, and each time your fingers approach it with the old confidence. Some ribs lift almost eagerly, as if the leaf has been waiting to part. Others require coaxing, especially near the base where the fibers hold to their former strength. You do not resent the stubborn ones. They slow the hand, and sometimes slowing is a kindness, because it restores attention before habit becomes too vague. The smell of the room becomes layered enough that a newcomer might find it overwhelming. But to you, it has structure. There is the damp leaf scent close to the hand, the older tobacco smell from the boards, the sharper smell from freshly exposed ribs, and the warm background of stove, cloth, and bodies. We breathe it as the worker breathes it. Not deeply for pleasure, not cautiously for fear, but because it is simply the air in which the day is made. When the meal pause approaches, hunger changes the way time feels. The last few leaves before bread can seem longer than the first many leaves of the morning, because the body has begun listening for permission to stop. Still, you finish properly. A half-torn leaf would dry poorly if left too long, and a messy table would greet you unpleasantly after the pause. So you complete the motion, square the pile, cover what must wait, and let the body step back from the task. Bread appears from cloths and tins, and the room becomes a quieter human place again. You may sit with hands loosely clasped, feeling the tenderness in the pads of the thumbs, while warmth from a mug enters the fingers from the outside. The taste of bread is plain, but after the tobacco's heavy scent it seems almost clean. Someone speaks of the rain, someone else of a market stall, and the conversation moves softly among the workers, without demanding that everyone join it. The Bremen tobacco stripper's pause is short enough that rest must be taken simply, without expectation of full renewal. You do not become untired. You only become able to continue. That is an important difference. And working people have known it in every trade. The body does not ask to be made new at midday. It asks for a little food, a little warmth, a moment away from the bend of the table, and perhaps one small look through the window at a world farther than the hand. Rain blurs the glass, and the city outside becomes a pattern of grey shapes and moving shadows. A cart passes slowly, wheels hissing in the wet. The horse lowers its head. A man crosses the yard with shoulders rounded under a coat. You watch for only a moment, but the eye is grateful for movement that does not require your own hands. Then the cloth is folded around the remaining bread, the mug is set down, and the room begins its return to labor. The first leaf after a pause often feels different. as if the hands must greet the material again. It is still the same work, yet the fingertips notice the dampness anew, and the rib seems firmer after the brief rest. You take care with it. The motion resumes, and the room's loose voices narrow back into the whisper of leaf and the small sounds of sorting. We enter the afternoon not with a boundary, but with a gradual settling, like dust returning after a door has closed. Afternoon work in the Bremen tobacco room carries a mild heaviness, especially on a wet day when the outside light never fully brightens. The stove warms the room, the damp leaves warm under handling, and the air grows thick enough that each breath seems to carry a little of the brown work into the body. You may wipe your fingers, then continue. You may shift your feet, then continue. The whole afternoon is made of such brief adjustments wrapped around the larger fact of continuing. A new bundle is brought to the table, tied or folded in a way that keeps its leaves together during storage and movement. When you open it, the inner leaves show a slightly different color, perhaps redder, perhaps duller, perhaps smoother along the blade. The change is enough for the hands to reconsider their pressure. You test one leaf near the base, and when the rib resists, you angle the pull more gently, letting the fibers choose their path rather than forcing a clean line where the leaf will not allow one. There is a practical morality in this kind of work, though no one may speak of it. Waste less, handle carefully, keep order, do not spoil what another person must use, save strength. Notice what changes. These are small rules, but they make a life inside repetitive labor more bearable, and they connect one worker to another across stages of the process. Your care becomes someone else's easier afternoon, even if that person never knows your name. The stripped tobacco gathered in its basket has a softness quite different from the whole leaves. It is looser, more yielding, less architectural without its ribs. When your hand presses it lightly to make room, it springs and settles, giving off a deeper scent from all the exposed surfaces. It is no longer leaf in the old sense. Not quite. It has become material for the next transformation. We watch that change happen slowly, not in one dramatic moment, but across many patient separations. The ribs, meanwhile, make a more angular heap, and their pale lines show how much structure has been removed. They are the bones of the workday, visible proof of what your hands have taken out. Some are long and nearly whole, some have broken under pressure, some carry too much blade and must be judged. You learn to see at a glance whether the heap looks right, and that glance is part of the work's constant self-correction. As the afternoon lengthens, the rain may stop, leaving the windows filmed and the yard outside dark with wet. The light that returns is not bright, but it has a silvery cast that lifts the room a little. You see moisture shining on a sill, a bead of water holding for a moment before sliding down. The tobacco smell remains heavy, but the cooler air near the glass suggests evening already, though there are still baskets to fill and cloths to manage before the work can loosen its grip. Someone begins to hum very softly, and the tune moves no farther than the nearest table. It is not a performance, only a thread of sound to help the mind pass across repeated motions. The hum disappears when a rib catches and returns for a few notes, then disappears again. We can let it be part of the room's fabric, along with the stove tick, the basket scrape, the leaf whisper, and the distant watery sound of a cart moving through the street beyond the wall. The Bremen tobacco stripper's skill is partly the ability to remain present without becoming tense. Too little attention, and the leaf tears badly. Too much strain, and the body tires before the day is done. The best pace is a middle pace, awake but not anxious, steady but not rigid. It is the pace of someone who has learned that work done well over many hours must be kind to the hands that do it. Late afternoon brings the tally closer, and with it a quiet awareness of what has been completed. You may not count every leaf, but you know the look of a good day's pile. You know whether the batch fought you, whether your fingers kept their accuracy, whether the finished tobacco is clean enough to satisfy the room's expectations. The judgment is not dramatic. It rests in the eye and hand, in the slight nod you might give your own work before covering it or carrying it onward. The forewoman's pencil moves again, and the day begins to turn into record. Names, amounts, batches, perhaps notes on condition, all the soft brown labor translated into lines and marks. There is something strange in that translation, because no number can hold the chill of the first leaf, the ache between the shoulders, or the smell that rises when a basket is lifted. Yet records are part of the factory's life, just as touch is part of the worker's life, and both pass through the same afternoon. When the final leaves are covered, the room's movement changes, and you can feel release approaching before anyone names it. Workers stand a little straighter. A few voices return. The scrape of cleaning begins at the tables. Damp cloths are folded and placed where they will be found again. Waste is gathered without haste. You brush the table in slow strokes, watching the fine brown fragments move together, and the clearing of the surface feels almost like clearing the mind. Your hands are at their darkest now, not dirty in the careless sense, but marked by the material they have served all day. The lines of the palms hold brown shadows. The thumb pads feel tender. The nails are edged with stain. When you rub finger against finger, the skin feels faintly rough and dry, despite the dampness of the leaves. These sensations belong to the worker's evening as much as the coat, the doorway, the street, and the thought of supper. The Bremen tobacco room rests by being put in order. That is how many workrooms rest, not by becoming empty of signs, but by having each sign placed where it belongs. Tables cleared, baskets aligned, leaves covered, tools set aside, floors swept enough for morning. The room does not look untouched, and it should not. Its peace comes from readiness, from the sense that today has been gathered and tomorrow has not yet been opened. Outside, the rain has left Bremen shining in a subdued way, with cobbles reflecting the pale lamps and warehouse walls holding darker patches where water has soaked the brick. You step into the cool, and the air enters your sleeves, your collar, the warm places behind your ears. It smells of river, coal smoke, horse, wet rope, and evening meals beginning somewhere behind closed doors. After the tobacco room, the outside world feels rinsed, though the tobacco scent still follows you faithfully. Walking home, you pass through the ordinary after-work life of the city, where every person seems to be carrying a little weather from their own occupation. The cooper may carry wood shavings in his cuffs. The washerwoman may smell of soap and steam. The porter may have rope marks near his palms. You carry tobacco not only as scent, but as a tempo still moving through the fingers. Even without a leaf, the hand remembers the rib. There is comfort in the way the city receives these tired bodies without ceremony. Doorways open, lamps are lit. A shopkeeper pulls in a crate from the damp. Somewhere, a church bell counts an hour in a voice made soft by mist. You do not need to speak to be part of the evening. You only walk, feeling the ground through worn soles, the coat settling on the shoulders, and the day loosening one step at a time. At the basin, later, the water darkens again, and the skin slowly gives up some of what it has held. Warmth moves into the joints. Soap slips over the thumb and gathers brown at the nail. You rinse, rub, rinse again, and still the faint smell remains. It may follow you into sleep, mingling with the room at home, the blankets, the extinguished lamp, and the last sounds of Bremen outside the window. Work has a way of remaining after work is done, and if sleep comes slowly, the mind may return not to the whole factory, but to one leaf held in quiet detail, the base thick under the thumb, the blade soft against the palm, the rib lifting with steady pressure, the two halves falling open, the table receiving them, the basket waiting. Nothing more needs to happen quickly. The motion repeats, slower each time, until the leaf is almost only a shape in the dark, and the work becomes a gentle passage from waking into rest. The factory, too, is resting now, with its windows dark and its tables cooling in the night air. The covered bundles wait without complaint, holding their moisture under cloth. The ribs are gone from the day's stations. The baskets have been moved onward. Bremen's damp breath presses against the brick walls, and inside the brown scent lingers in the boards like a memory that has no need to speak.